As people join the webinar, because we have such a robust agenda, we want to get to this subject. I'll go ahead and get started with the introductions. My name is Sharon Roberson. I'm President and CEO of YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Welcome to our Stand Against Injustice Lunch and Learn that will address the issue of DV abusers guaranteed guns under the Second Amendment. And thank you for joining us. I'll start off by thanking our sponsor, Nissan Foundation, for making this webinar possible and free. And we hope that this conversation will serve to build community, spark dialogue, and build a consciousness of legacies of discrimination and oppression. A little bit about the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. We provide emergency shelter for women and girls, for women and children, that is, in an undisclosed location here in Nashville. And we provide an emergency text line. We provide services for the individuals while they're in shelter. We work with legal services and other bodies to provide orders of protections for individuals. So we provide a full services of for domestic violence victims. Today, we're talking about a case. It is a Supreme Court case, United States versus Rahimi. And this is a case that involves really a conflict between the rights of an individual under the Second Amendment and protecting victims of domestic violence. And it involves an individual who had a restraining order against him and for domestic violence. As a result, under federal law, he was not allowed to have a gun. Police raided his apartment for another purpose and found the guns, and he was found in violation of this federal statute. After he was convicted, it was appealed to the Fifth Circuit. Originally, the Fifth Circuit we believe, about to opine and hold up the lower court's determination. However, there was a brewing case decided by the Supreme Court that took a different slant on how you view Second Amendment gun rights. This started this process such that now the Rahimi matter is before the United States Supreme Court. And on November 7th, the U.S. Supreme Court will begin hearing oral arguments in this case. Now, we have a panel of individuals that are going to speak to this issue. And I am thrilled that they have taken time out of their busy schedule to support our efforts in this regard. As a YW of Nashville, Middle Tennessee, of course, we are advocates restricting firearms from convicted DV offenders. And I always say that when we have these lunch and learns, we seek to invite people to the table for educational purposes. We do not indict you for having opinions that are different from ours. We just hope that you will listen to some of the information you will receive today and make a valid determination. Today, we have three panelists. Catherine Beane, who is a Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy at YWCA USA. We have Judge Allegra Walker, General Sessions Division 4 Metro Nashville Davidson County Judge. And we also have Leah Roemer-Oakley, Strategy Consultant at Kenzie Consultant. Now, I'm going to ask each of these individuals to give us a little bit about their background and to discuss how the issue of domestic violence became important to them. And how are you related to the issue? I'll start with you, Catherine.
Thank you, Sharon. And let me start by saying thank you so much for including me in today's discussion. It's a real honor to be here with YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. I'm Catherine Beane. I have been with YWCA just short of 8 years as the Vice President for Public Policy and Advocacy. And in this work, I get to work with local associations and local leaders like Sharon all over the country in addressing public policy issues at the local, state, and federal levels. I would say that my eyes have been most wide opened since joining YWCA in 2015. I'm one of the, I know, very privileged and fortunate people to have not had just really immediate connections with domestic or sexual violence or particularly for today's topic with the use of firearms in domestic violence and in DV homicide. However, since joining YWCA very early on, I just was so struck by the prevalence, the idea that on any given day, you could, this was my personal experience, I could Google certain set of, key terms, and I would find all across the country, including in my own community, a murder of 2 or 3 people within a house. First clue, second clue, kind of looking forward. And it's very, unfortunately, easy to spot where this is happening, including close to our own homes. There was one particularly cold morning where I was up early ahead of getting my 4 kids up and out the door for school. And I just was caught flat-footed by the idea that another mother had been gunned down, and her child as well, by a former intimate partner with a gun as they were headed to school. So for me, it's more I think the connection I feel as a woman, as a mother, at the emotional level with the violence that folks face and the extreme consequences of that violence, some deep concerns about the generational passing of that violence from one generation to the next. And then just the work of YWCA, knowing that more than half of our local associations were the largest network of domestic and sexual violence service providers in the country. So embedded in the work that I do day to day is working on the Hill or with the administration or supporting a local network around both issue education around domestic violence, but also change in policies. Sharon.
Judge Walker, sorry, how do you fit into this domestic violence space?
So good afternoon, and thank you all for the invitation to speak. I always love to talk about domestic violence and education and awareness. I'm currently General Sessions Judge in domestic violence. So I'm one of 3 judges here in Davidson County that exclusively hears domestic violence cases and orders of protection. So I have been in this work. Well, let me back up. I always tell people domestic violence chose me. I did not choose domestic violence. I initially got into this area of work back in 2007 when I was a prosecutor, and I used to be a public defender as well. So I used to defend people who were charged with domestic violence. So I started prosecuting in 2007, and I was just chosen. I just really was chosen to do it. It was just something that I really felt passionate about. I thought it really affected our community, especially with women of color. We suffered disproportionate numbers of violence opposed to our white female counterparts. And it was a way I could really give back. I could be that voice for victims. I could stand in the gap for those women who were suffering from violence, whose children were suffering from violence. So I began prosecuting, and I did that for 6 years. And then when I ran for judge, that particular seat was just so happened to be open, and I ran for that seat, which is why I kind of say it kind of chose me. So I've been on the bench now for 9 years doing domestic violence work as well as orders of protection. I love it. It is emotionally exhausting, as it is for all people who do this type of work, but I really think I was called to do this work, and it's very important to me. It's important to our community and to the women, which is why this subject is important as well. So that's my story, and thank you again for having me.
Well, thank you. And Leah, how do you fit into this domestic violence space?
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Roemer-Oakley, and I'm a strategy consultant for Kenzie Consulting, specializing in strategic projects. I have the real life experience of being a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault and stalking. And so I had to seek services from the YWCA in Memphis. And after I received the help that I needed and the assistance that I needed to feel safer, I wanted to give back to the organization that helped me. So I volunteered with the Y for 2 years. And then I ended up working for the Y and became the director of court advocacy, and also their program coordinator for a systemic project that reviewed organizational practices and best responses to victims of domestic violence. And since leaving the Y, I've continued to speak out against intimate partner violence and support DV awareness initiatives. When I first went through my domestic violence situation, I had to drop out of school because I felt so threatened by the person that did those things to me. They also attended college with me. And so I'm proud to let everyone know that I completed my undergraduate degree. I went back to school, and it's in organizational leadership from the University of Memphis. And I'm now a current graduate student for their strategic leadership program in their graduate school. And so I am very passionate about this subject. I'm speaking from my perspective, but I'm also speaking for the thousands of survivors and victims, people that were in fear, that wanted to get orders of protections, and personally let me know when it was granted that they felt safer knowing that that person couldn't carry a weapon. And so that's why I'm here. I'm hopeful. What I hope to get out of this call today is an open, honest dialogue amongst each other. And hopefully we'll get some people to talk to each other about the difficult subject of the abusers possibly getting to keep their weapons. So
I'm going to go next back to you, Judge Walker, and then I'll go to you, Catherine and Leah. But I want you to give us sort of a view of firearms impacting the lives of DV victims and survivors within your long career in this space. What role have firearms played? You know, if we did have an overturning of any restriction on abusive individuals being able to hold their firearms, what effect would that have?
An order of protection is for protection. And if I can answer that question, I think that you're asking me, but I'm not sure, so I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. We'll go ahead and hear your comments, and then we'll get to you, Judge.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
So as a survivor, give us your perspective. That's a very important perspective.
Well, the protective order is to feel protected and to feel safer. And so if we're saying, hey, this person can't text you, he can't come to your job, he can't call you, he can't, enter your life in any way, but he can carry his gun. Me as a survivor, I'm terrified just knowing that he has the gun. And so I'm sure everyone in this call will agree with me that a person who's abusive, they're not going to reason with you. There is no logical, thought process. They're going to do what they're going to do. And I've just filed for an order of protection, let's say, and it's just been granted, let's say. So I've just left that person, let's say. And so he's or she or whoever, they are angry at the same time. So I'm even in more danger having an order of protection granted, and then also that person being allowed to keep their weapon. And so those are my thoughts. I'm sorry.
Oh, not at all. No, that's very important. That leads up to what we're going to ask the judge. Okay, she's a survivor. She's gotten an order of protection. She's out there. Let's say the Supreme Court decides that, well, he has a right under the Second Amendment to continue to have his weapon. What happens now?
So if the Supreme Court makes that decision, and we pray that that they will be on the right side of law this go round, that will mean that the Rahimis of the world or anybody else under that order of protection will be able to lawfully carry those weapons, which has it's dangerous. It's not so much dangerous to women, it's dangerous to our children, It's dangerous to law enforcement. It's dangerous to the whole community that surrounds us. Women who've been threatened with violence, with weapons, they have a much higher risk of death than anything else. Like, your risks just go through the roof. So to bring those weapons back into the mix is just a dangerous recipe for disaster for our communities as a whole. So I really do hope that they take those things in consideration and not make this ruling, because it will so negatively impact our community. Just not women who are victims of violence. It's going to impact the whole community in a very dangerous way.
Right. And Catherine, YWCA has filed an amicus brief on this subject. Why is this so important? You're looking globally. I would say that I've always understood that as YWs, we provide domestic violence services all over the country. That's one of the things that we do, probably the largest in totality provider of domestic violence services. So I understand that YW had a true interest in this matter, but give us some more feel for that.
Yeah, I think that we stepped into this space a number of years ago, actually, working on closing the boyfriend loophole, looking very specifically at the firearms, preventing gun violence, both because of I'm going to call it domestic violence homicide. The firearm connection to domestic violence, it's not just the actual killing of someone, it's the attempted killing, it is the terrorizing that happens. And the numbers are just astounding. You know, I'm going to look at my policy brief on this screen. 4.5 million women in the US have been threatened with a gun by an intimate partner, and nearly 1 million women alive today have been shot or shot at by an intimate partner. I mean, the sheer breadth and scope of that is just tremendous, and that's not the right word. It is frightening, and it is a gender-based violence problem predominantly. That is certainly the way YWCA USA and our network approaches it. You know, the statistic that 50 women in the US each month on average are shot to death by intimate partners. The presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation makes it 5 times more likely that a woman will be killed. These are the kinds of national statistics that really drove us to make sure that we took a stand in the Roemer-Oakley case through an amicus brief, because the stakes are so high for individuals who experience domestic violence. If this, you know, the time period around that first probably 36, 48 hours around when a victim, because at that point, they're still a victim, they haven't survived it yet. But when a victim goes to seek that protective order, are the riskiest times for them. And if there is access to a gun by an abuser, then you face these stats of, you know, 5 times more likely that a woman will be killed in that situation. There's a layer of racial disproportionality in this as well that is very concerning to us as an organization dedicated to eliminating racism and empowering women. Just knowing that the stats are higher for Black women and Indigenous women, as well as some other marginalized groups like younger women who are, you know, women under 20, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ plus community. These are all communities for whom the risks are even greater, just looking across the statistics. But when we come back to the brief itself in this particular case, you know, there's kind of 2 things going on, at least in the case, and then what we have put forward with others in the amicus brief. Number 1 is that the lower court out of the 5th Circuit has, we think, misinterpreted a legal standard that needs to be followed in order to evaluate the constitutionality of restrictions on access to firearms. I'm a lawyer. I don't like to be a lawyer every day, but that's the most plain language I can get. You know, they have words in the brief like analogs and historical twins and all of this stuff, but it really comes down to whether or not this court will allow Congress to pass laws to address serious public safety concerns in communities in ways that restrict access to firearms, we believe appropriately. And part of the reason we think it's appropriate is not just the risk of threat, but this is the second half of the amicus brief we filed, that we joined in filing, is that the restrictions on access, when you take a firearm away from someone who stands under an order of protection, right? There's the pervasiveness of the violence, but then when you take that gun away, they actually can point to cities and states where the risks decrease by, in statewide 13%, in particular cities by as much as 25%. And this is a way to know that 31 states have some regulations in place that limit access, and where those things are in access, they are successful at decreasing the risk of harm to women, to other victims of domestic violence. And what we are hoping, just like the judge mentioned, is that the court will recognize in its ruling just how significant a state interest there is in decreasing the likelihood of domestic violence homicide. That's really going to be what's embedded in their back and forth and lawyering, as we lawyers like to do, and arguments about what the right standard is for review. Is there a strong enough commitment by this court in securing public safety for survivors, right? For those who are experiencing domestic violence, in order to keep the expansive reach of Second Amendment and Second Amendment advocates in check.
Yes, and I'll go back to Leah. A lot of, I'm a lawyer too, Catherine. I guess we both suffer like that. I guess we got three of us on here, but court cases can be very difficult. And a lot of times when arguments are made, you do have a lot of legal language and legalese, and people don't understand it. But in essence, what we're looking at is some sort of restrictions on what is viewed as a constitutional right for individual in order to protect others. And in fact, this person's become a poster child for the rights of gun possessions, because some want freedom of guns and some don't. Leah, let me go into sort of your view of historically how domestic violence victims were treated in a system, women that is, and how things have evolved and how this might make things go back to, I guess, worse days, or days that were not great for domestic violence victims.
Right, exactly. And what you're saying really resonates with the comments in the chat section. The sad irony is that the people that are making these decisions and these laws from a long time ago did not include the people in these decisions. When I say the people, I mean the people that made these decisions long ago were not women of color. They were not women at all. Mm-hmm. And so, but now this is going to affect women of color. This is going to affect women. This is going to affect, like it was said earlier, the LGBTQ plus community, pregnant women, women with disabilities, everyone. But I really do believe it would just be such a detriment. It would be such a downfall to survivors to have to go back. And so, as I was saying earlier before the call started, at one point, domestic violence was legal. And so, and these decisions were made before domestic violence was made illegal. And so it's hardly fair to make this kind of drastic decision that will ultimately impact victims and survivors so drastically. I mean, we're talking people that are getting killed are Black women. They're getting killed. They're not getting killed by, you know, fake guns. They're getting killed by real guns. And guns that people have, and we as a society have a chance to prevent that gun from being pulled and used and from someone being killed. But no, we're saying, actually, if this goes through, if this goes the other way, hey, we feel it's more important for you to have the right to bear arms and protect yourself, even though the more vulnerable person needs, in my eyes, I feel more protection. So.
All right. Judge Walker, you've been at this a long time. Have you seen an evolution as far as protections from gun violence against survivors? Have you seen things get better, or is it going in the wrong direction? How is it sort of in real life? How are we using the resources we have to protect survivors against gun violence?
Well, what I say every day, all day when I'm in court and I'm seeing these cases, I can only do what the state allows me to do. I have to follow the law. And that law is not always here to protect women and children from violence. And it's not really here to protect us from a whole lot of other things that we've seen go on in the country. And unfortunately, Tennessee is at the top of that list of legislators who don't really care about gun violence. They don't care about keeping us healthy and safe. So I can only do what I can do. I think it's a continuous problem. We've put some things in place. You know, we'll ask some additional questions. The prosecutors have some additional tools in their toolbox. Law enforcement have used some additional things trying to isolate, who has possession of these guns. They do these lethality assessments to figure out, which women are most likely to, have an issue with gun violence from people who were arrested. We put some things in place in the court system to try to have compliance hearings to see, okay, if you have admitted that you do possess a weapon, that we make, we'll have you come back to ensure that that weapon has been dispossessed of. And that's just if you tell me that you have one. And even with the dispossession, because of our dispossession laws are so lax here in the state, I can have you come back and you say, hey, I gave my weapon to, cousin Billy. Well, the courts really didn't have any power to say, hey, to bring in cousin Billy to verify any of that information. It's just kind of what you say. It goes on paper and it's in your file. But that's kind of where it stops. So, the laws can be tightened up with that respect, but you have to have a state government who's willing to do that and sees the need. And unfortunately, we don't have that here in Tennessee, as we have seen with the whole Covenant shooting situation that happened this year. I mean, the whole government had a whole meltdown behind that. So you kind of know where they are here in the state of Tennessee, and we just have to work around that system and uplift each other with these various agencies in the court system, trying to ensure that everybody is going to be safe. But it's a difficult task to do.
Sharon, can I add something to that?
Yes, of course.
Sure. I in addition to what you just shared, Judge Walker, I can say that like nationally, there were a number of years ago, it was probably in the 2016 timeframe. There was an opportunity to bring together and get perspectives from a number of YWCAs on the issue of domestic violence and guns, right? And trying to really lock in addition to access, right? Like how could we, not in addition to, how do we, like, where are the bottlenecks? Where are the challenge points where the proper standards or laws already exist that require the court or the law enforcement to take affirmatively take away a firearm from someone who commits domestic violence? Where are the barriers to that actually happening? And what we were hearing from YWCAs around the country is that in some places, not just states, but localities, right, judges weren't aware of the requirement to do that, or were refusing to issue those orders. And I'm not saying Tennessee, actually remember this from out west. So no, I'm not picking on Tennessee when I say this, and judges. So I want to be real careful here. But just nationally, there was this problem of, the judges not either being willing to or knowing the steps to follow in order to put the right procedure in place. And then on the law enforcement side, an oft heard response was, we don't have any place to store these weapons. And so there were these real, like, seemingly silly barriers to actually enforcing the laws that were on the books 7-8 years ago, in some very specific places. And that's feedback that we provided to the U.S. Department of Justice, which was the entity that was looking for the feedback. Obviously, we've had different administrations and different folks in charge over the last 8 years that I've been here. It's just remembering that makes me know, maybe I want to follow up on that, because there's a lot of work, even if this administration in place now or the last one has made progress on that issue, right? We know that there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of advocacy on the ground, educate the players in the system who have the power to implement the state past the decision that comes down in the Rahimi case. Hopefully the court will do the right thing here for survivors.
Well, one thing that Judge Walker was talking about here in Tennessee, we had a special legislative session in light of a horrendous gun violence case that took place at a small school here in Nashville. And at that time, the then governor called for a special session to look at what we can do to have common sense gun laws restrictions. Of course, the NRA was saying we were seeking to criminalize gun holders. One of the things that one group that we were supportive of tried to get changed was to allow for higher penalties for those who were convicted of domestic violence, making that rather than misdemeanors to felonies, and various versions of that legislation was proposed. With that said, nothing passed. And so really we have an uphill battle, and a case decision that the Supreme Court would even lower the bar on what the states can do regarding gun restrictions would really be devastating given the state of our legislature here in Tennessee. So that's some of the things that we are looking at. Okay. We did touch on this issue, but in 2020, 4 Black women and girls were murdered every day. And that's an extremely sad statistic. Black women are killed by men at a rate nearly 3 times that of white women. Black women killed by men were, on the average, 36 years old. Why are Black women and other women of color disproportionately harmed by domestic violence? Leah, I'll start with you.
And those are really sad statistics. And I can't help but think about the value that they are putting on us. And it's not a lot, because I'm reading an order protection, the warnings to respondent after order protection is granted. It says only the court can change this order. Willful violation of this order by the respondent will constitute contempt of court and potential penalties, including up to 10 days in jail and a $50 fine for each violation. A $50 fine for each violation for if they don't hand over their guns. That does not sit well with me, and it shouldn't sit well with anyone. You're saying, hey, I should have the right to carry my gun, but if I don't, give it over to you, you're only going to get a $50 fine and you may get 10 days in jail. And no one's enforcing this either because there's not a process for enforcing this. As said just recently, there was the excuse of where would we put the guns? And that was an excuse that we definitely heard here in Memphis. And so we have abusers that are having orders of protections granted against them. And then they're saying on a piece of paper, hey, you're going to have to hand over and dispossess your gun. But we're also saying, if you don't do that, you're going to get a slap on the wrist. And meanwhile, the survivor and victim is counting and relying on the court system that not only can he not have a gun, that that there's going to be some sort of accountability, that the gun is going to be dispossessed, that it's going to go out of his hands. And so for me, that's just putting too much stress and burden on the person who's trying to protect themselves.
Yes. And we had a question, and I think we should address that. And it really was more of an understanding of the role of the Supreme Court of the United States and how we started with the Fifth Circuit. Now, the Fifth Circuit is technically creating the rules of engagement or laws for what Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana. I think those are the three states in the Fifth Circuit. And that Court of Appeals has created a situation where those states have to follow what that court says. However, that puts the other states and the other circuits in this situation where they want consistent application of the federal laws across the United States. And so therefore, rightfully, it should go to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court is the ultimate decision maker on the Constitution unless we have a constitutional amendment or change, but I don't think that's going to happen. So we're really stuck with whatever they come up with and the interpretations that follow. So if the Supreme Court makes this decision, then that will be what we'll have to follow, depending on the various interpretations and the language that comes out in the case. That will be followed throughout the country. And Catherine, you can speak to that.
Exactly. And in terms of what happens to the existing laws that are on the books, they get nullified. Judge, do I have that right? I think I have it right. They get nullified. And I think the most recent, very public example of this is that when the Supreme Court issued its rulings in the Dobbs decision overruling Roe v. Wade, that meant that laws that existed at the state level that were in conflict with the Supreme Court's rulings all of a sudden aren't in existence anymore. They are set back. They are not, that's not a constitutional thing that can be followed by the state. And so the same thing happens in the guns, anything actually that is, if it violates the Constitution, it goes from just impacting that circuit to impacting the entire country. Judge, did I say that okay?
You said that perfectly, Ms. Catherine.
And see, another example of that, for instance, on a more positive note, when the U.S. Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional to execute minors, then there were individuals that were on death row that were minors. I know it's a sad situation, but that's a personal viewpoint that I feel very strongly about. And those individuals were taken off death row. You could not execute those individuals because of a Supreme Court holding. So it works across the country. A lot of it's going to be down to the granular nature. We do have a couple of judges that I think may provide relief, but the case that led to this case was one that was decided that had as the basis for this decision looking historically. Now, I don't understand how that works. Historically, Judge Thomas said as what was going on at the time that the Constitution was created. Now, those of us, nobody is alive that was alive when the Constitution was created, but certainly things have evolved so much in this area specifically on how women are viewed, how domestic violence is viewed. Even within our lifetime, there were issues of spousal rape that were not considered rape. There were issues on how women were viewed. So I think certainly some of those arguments could be made that things have evolved so significantly in this space that we should look at things very differently. Let me go to you, Judge Walker. Some questions, this is beyond the local level, but some were saying maybe some of the other new voices, we have a new African-American woman judge. What can she do to help us?
You know,
I love my Black female judges at all levels.
she's only one judge of the Supreme Court. I mean, so I'm not sure, you know, how much influence she may have. I don't know. I'm not real sure how much influence she may have with that. So I really can't speak to that. I don't have a whole lot of hope, to be honest. But I really can't speak to the influence. But I would like to go back, and I know you brought it up a moment ago, and Leah kind of touched on it. But when we talked about Black women being disproportionately affected with domestic violence and reasons as to why that they're disproportionately affected, I really just want to, you know, for our listening audience, because, you know, I think culturally there's a whole lot of reasons why Black women are different and why our numbers are so high with incidents of domestic violence and for the deaths as well. You know, I just think culturally, women of color do not trust law enforcement.
Yeah.
They do not trust the court system. Therefore, I may not go in and report. I think sexism, of course, you know, with women of color and just all women comes into play as to why we don't report and why our numbers are higher. You know, employment is a big impact with women with domestic violence as to why they do not report. If I'm a single mother of 2 or 3 kids and I have to work, I don't have time. I literally do not have time to come down to the police department to report, to go to court 2 and 3 times where there's continuances. I cannot lose my job, or I may have an employee who's threatening firing me if I do not show up to work. I think culturally as well in our communities, it's that little quiet, dirty little secret. What goes on in our house stays in our house and we don't talk about it. I mean, that has hurt us, I think, for generations. That has hurt us, and it still goes on right now. People try to be secretive about the issue of domestic violence. I think Black women and women of color somehow have a loyalty to the community. We want to hold these families together. We have the church that's in your business wanting to, you know, they'll put the scripture on you all day long and twirl it around with a little ounce of Jesus and have you back in a dangerous situation. I think, you know, and lastly, that backlash that comes when we get that courage to report or we get that courage to call our girlfriends, and all of a sudden, you know, the victim is now victimized. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. I should have just been quiet, you know, done what he told me to do, or got his dinner there on time, girlfriend, or just all these things. We can't take it. So therefore, we're not reporting these things as often as we should. And that is why a lot of Black women or women of color are dying at the hands of their victims. And in Tennessee, we're number, what is that, 7? Are we 7?
In the nation.
7 in the nation of women who are killed by their partners. And 2 weeks ago in Nashville, we just honored 10 or 11 victims of domestic violence that were killed this year. So, I mean, it's a huge problem. And there are lots of reasons why there's a problem, just women of color and just women across the board. So again, that's why this decision is going to be critical to figure out what's going to happen. I mean, if they rule in its favor, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad, and those numbers are going to go up.
And women will die. I know at the Weaver Center, in speaking to the women there, one thing that I have learned about domestic violence victims, especially women of color, there's a desire for the violence to stop, but they really do not want to get the individual arrested because of the distrust and the historical, and rightfully so, the system doesn't always work in your favor. And you do have a lot of family pressures. I am amazed at the number of families that don't really understand domestic violence. I wish that more people came out to the Nashville Coalition's Bridge event. This is an event that's held each year to honor those who have lost their lives to domestic violence, and the number of families each year that go to the microphone and said, if we had understood, we would have acted differently. Because they do not understand that this is something that can turn lethal until it does. And they are so saddened, but they have not a clue of how these things evolve and how they escalate and how the individual is, and they don't really understand until something catastrophic happens.
That's right.
We have a couple. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you go ahead.
No, go ahead, Catherine.
I was gonna say there's a question in the Q&A that might dovetails with what you just said.
All right, go ahead, respond, please.
Yeah. So there's a question from Vanessa Yari about, is there anything individual organizations can do? And I think that, from where I sit at a national organization with locals around the country, and I'm gonna let you talk a lot on the ground about what can be done. I think that the things that come to mind are, learning more about the issue, right, in your own community, what we're doing right here, talking about the issue, understanding a little bit more, having those personal conversations with folks in your networks, looking for your organization to learn from the YWCA of Nashville, or if you have joined us from another community on this webinar, find a YWCA or other, if there's not a YWCA, another domestic violence service provider community, so that your organization can learn and also learn how they can help support efforts to ensure that the policies that are enacted, because that's what we're talking about here. The Rahimi challenge is to taking away effort. And I'd also say join YWCA USA's Action Center. Go to ywca.org, click on ACT. And if there's ever an opportunity to weigh in with Congress on this particular issue or others, we'll have it there, and you'll join our network, and we'll be able to send you an email, ping you to take action, and you can share that with your folks, because it's in that coordinated way that we can really, and I think it's the rising voice of things that's needed in order to make that policy change at a national level. But Sharon, to you or others for that local level.
Yes, and I will say it is an uphill battle. However, every issue that's important tends to be an uphill battle, and I do think that there is merit. And even if a decision goes in the wrong direction, having spent a lifetime slicing and dicing the decision and finding little nuances that make your case distinguished, I think we'll be full force having to make cases that distinguish a particular case from the case that's decided by the Supreme Court. And that may mean it has another case going up to the Supreme Court, but that is something that we will need citizens to be engaged in. I'll go to you, Leah. Those who are listening are very emotional about this issue, but we've had Catherine to discuss how individuals can get involved. You're there in Memphis, and you have a very robust domestic violence YWCA there. Tell us how people in other areas of the state can be part of this work.
Well, definitely, I encourage you to take the time to read up and listen of what's going on across our nation, and especially in Tennessee. We talked about why is this happening to Black women, but we didn't talk about why does the abuser keep getting away with it? Why does the abuser find another victim? And then, you know, time and time again, we're then helping another survivor from from the same abuser. They're serial abusers. It's happening because they're getting away with it. There's not enough accountability. And with technology and the way things have developed over the past couple of years, these abusers are not only manipulative, they're clever. They are finding sneakier ways to violate these orders of protections, and they're finding more innovative ways to use technology against victims. And so there are a lot of resources online about internet safety through the Tennessee Coalition, through the Nashville YWCA. And I encourage everyone to go to the Tennessee Coalition to get help and look at additional statewide resources. There's actually a map that lists all of the statewide resources on the Tennessee Coalition. And they have there's a National Domestic Violence Hotline number. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. And as far to answer your question of what's going on in Memphis, the Memphis YWCA is very active. They have a 24-hour crisis and support helpline, just like the YWCA in Nashville. And that number is 901-725-4277. And so they offer crisis and support, and they offer emergency shelter, of course, one-on-one case management and services of that nature. I just encourage, you know, if you're listening to this and you know someone or someone has reached out to you, because I have people to reach out to me all the time that are trying to access services, but they don't want to tell anyone. They don't want anyone to know. Domestic violence does not discriminate. These are professionals in the workplace. These are nurses, doctors, attorneys that are being touched by domestic violence. They're everywhere around. I would encourage you to listen to what the person is saying. Try not to be judgmental in any way, and encourage them to seek help and assistance. Through the Tennessee Coalition, you can do a personal safety plan. And what I like about the personal safety plan is, like, everyone's situation is different, but it also gives you the option to stay as anonymous as possible and to protect yourself and your family as you're safety planning. So those are my suggestions. I definitely agree with everything that has been said on this call, especially with the judge. And I just encourage everyone to keep fighting the good fight and to keep listening, to keep speaking out, and to get involved, even if it's, you know, donating to your local emergency shelter, getting hygiene kits together, you know, lobbying with each other and getting down to the root cause is always a good way to get involved.
And as we close out, and Judge Walker, you alluded to the toll that it takes, but I want each one of you, because this work is difficult. And I myself have been there in situations where I thought, how am I going to get through this? Especially when I see individuals, unfortunately, going back to an abusive situation. That's very heartbreaking, but I get it, because it usually takes us individuals 7 times to leave. And I understand all the things that go along with that. But what do you do to take care of yourself that keeps you going?
I think for me personally, it really has been a hard balancing act for me, because the work kind of just brings you in, just sucks you in. And I do it 8 months out the year. So I exclusively do domestic cases and OPs for 8 months out the year. You know, now that I'm older and I need to, like, force myself to do different things, I do. So to be honest, I exercise a lot. In the mornings, I'm on a routine where I have to exercise, at least 30 minutes to an hour a day, just to level off and just to be in good space, because I know that the day is going to be stressful and I never know how stressful that is going to be. When I'm done from work, I leave it there. I have to consciously leave it there and not talk about things. When people ask me and bring me into it, I have to have boundaries. I can't talk about it right now. I don't want to, and no is a complete answer. And that's just what it is. And I love on myself a lot. I mean, I do lots of things. I like to eat. I like to eat and try out all these 800 restaurants that are here in Nashville, which is why I have to exercise so much. But I just do some of those basic things just to kind of keep me off the ledge, because the work is draining, but it's necessary, and I don't mind a bit. So I take the good with the bad.
Okay, Catherine.
Only thing I'd add to that, is, and it's something I'm going to do tonight, is where I have the opportunity to connect with colleagues in person, because you can tell from my background, I work at home. Still, I go downtown a good bit for congressional or White House meetings, but for the most part, I'm sitting here at my computer all day. I do walk in the morning. And then when the opportunity comes up to do something where I get to be in a room with other advocates on the really, really deep issues that are both that are really privileged to be able to work on every day, but they take it out of you, certainly take it out of me. I go. So I'll be able to go to a reception with a lot of civil rights activists and just reconnect in person with folks who know the pain, but also share the joy and the hard work as a way to revitalize myself.
All right, Leah, fill in the blank, because we're running out of time, but I do want you to respond to this definitely. To protect women from intimate partner violence in this country, we need more of what?
We need more ears. We need more people listening.
All right. All right. Catherine, fill in the same question. What do we need more of?
Money from the federal government, but that's also what I do for a living, is try to get them to pony up the money that's needed for things like domestic violence services. So that's what I would add.
I like that answer. The YW, a nonprofit. Judge Walker, what do we need more of to protect women from intimate partner violence?
I think we need more resources in education. I know you asked for one, but I gave you two: resources and education.
Yes, both of them we do need more of. Well, I thank so much all of you for this panel. I thank those who attended. This has been fabulous. Stay tuned and become engaged in this issue, because oftentimes you can feel as though your voice is not heard, but it's very important. And I will always add this: please vote, because it does make a difference whether or not that you think so. We need individuals that are sitting there on the front lines with us. It is always wonderful to go into a situation when you have advocates on your side. And I do think that it's important that we vote, we get engaged, and we'll stay passionate about this issue, because I always say at the YWCA here in Nashville and in Memphis too, and in Knoxville, we are in the business of saving lives. And if thinking people don't step up to make these issues known and to fight for those who cannot advocate for themselves, we will have a negative, violent, really society that is not not a representation of the best of us. I thank you all for being here today, and thank you to our panelists. Thank you. Bye.